If you're tired of all the contradictory online chat about how you should be dealing with anxiety, then this is the video for you, because in it I'm going to be simplifying things for you by breaking down the strategies that work and the ones that sadly don't. Let's do it. Welcome back to the channel, or if this is your first time, then I'm Tim Box. I'm a hypnotist and mind coach, and for more than a decade now, I've been working one-to-one with clients to help them overcome all sorts of anxiety-related issues. Now, anxiety is something we all deal with at some point, and naturally, we want to find ways to handle it. The problem is, not all the advice out there actually works. In fact, some of the most commonly suggested strategies can even at times make things worse. But fear not, because in this video, I'm going to talk about 3 anxiety strategies that don't work and 3 that actually do. So you can stop wasting your time on unhelpful approaches and start taking real control of your anxiety response. So, first up, let's start with one of the biggest myths when it comes to anxiety, the idea that simply thinking positively will fix everything. Now, don't get me wrong, having a positive outlook can be great, and I often get referred to as a positive thinker, but when it comes to anxiety, just trying to think positively often doesn't help at all. Why? Because your mind isn't stupid. If you're terrified of an upcoming presentation, telling yourself, I'm totally confident this will be amazing, won't work. And it won't work because you don't actually believe it. It doesn't matter how many times you repeat something that you believe to be false, it won't suddenly become true. This is because you can't hold 2 contradictory beliefs in your mind at once. Your mind will reject what it regards to be false. This is why a lot of the work I do with clients will involve invalidating the current negative belief, so we can remove that before we attempt to install something more positive. So a much better approach to positive thinking is actually realistic thinking. Instead of trying to enforce a positive delusion, start recognizing that the scary stories you're telling yourself about what might go wrong aren't actually true. All those what ifs we go through is just our mind making things up. Not because it hates us, but because it seeks to protect us. But of course, most of the time, the worst case scenario we imagine never actually happens. You don't have to tell yourself everything will be amazing. You just have to acknowledge that your anxiety-driven predictions aren't actually facts. That simple shift in thinking allows us some much needed perspective and can massively reduce our anxiety. One of the biggest mistakes people make when dealing with anxiety is avoiding the situations they feel might make them anxious. Feeling anxious about work? Take time off. Overwhelmed by a project? Delay it until you feel better. Now, this might seem logical, but here's the problem. Avoidance only reinforces the idea that we can't cope with daily life. The more we avoid things that make us anxious, the scarier they become. The time off work extends longer and longer, and if we're still feeling anxious, we might disengage from more and more situations in our life. We end up making the mistake of thinking that it's daily life that's the problem for us, when of course it's actually the way we're reacting to it that's the issue. We're simply giving ourselves the idea that we just can't handle our day-to-day existence. So what do we do instead? Well, instead of avoidance, we should focus on self-care. Now, self-care doesn't mean bubble baths and scented candles, although if you like that sort of thing, go for it. It certainly won't do any harm. What I mean by self-care is managing overwhelm. If we're stuck in fight or flight mode, what massively helps is clearing the decks of unnecessary stress. That means prioritizing what really matters, tackling one thing at a time, and reducing the mental clutter that's keeping us in an anxious state. Stop giving focused time and energy to things that are outside of your control, and of the things that you are in control of, don't pressure yourself to take care of them all at once. If there are certain responsibilities you don't meet today, or certain tasks that didn't get done, that's okay. Being human is not something to lament, and trying to be perfect didn't achieve happiness for anyone. So self-care isn't about avoiding responsibilities, it's about making sure we're in the best possible frame of mind to handle them. A lot of people advocate distraction as an effective way of dealing with anxiety. Feeling anxious? Watch TV, scroll social media, just keep your mind busy. But here's the issue. Distraction simply teaches us that anxiety is something to be feared. If we constantly need to distract ourselves from it, we reinforce the idea that anxiety is dangerous and must be avoided at all costs. We create our go-to countermeasures for those times when we feel anxious, and all we do is teach ourselves that countermeasures are necessary. A better approach? Ignoring it. Now, this doesn't mean pretending anxiety doesn't exist. It means recognizing that it's okay that it does and not letting it dictate your actions. Basically, getting on with your life regardless of how you feel. If we find ourselves focusing on how anxious we feel, that potentially just makes us more anxious because we're now noticing feeling anxious more than we ordinarily would. Instead, how about we simply ask ourselves, if I wasn't so focused on anxiety right now, what would I be doing? So if you wake up feeling anxious, you still go to work. If you feel nervous before an event, you go anyway. If anxious thoughts pop up, you acknowledge them but don't engage with them in a fearful way. The key is to not let anxiety dictate your agenda. Anxiety comes and goes, and when we stop fighting it or running from it, it actually passes much faster as we teach ourselves a better message that anxiety doesn't stop us living our life to the fullest. So you've probably noticed that the strategies that do work are very similar to the ones that don't. The only difference really is the message we give ourselves along the way. So positive thinking doesn't work, but realistic thinking does, because the reality is that we're not under threat. Avoidance doesn't work, but self-care does, because we don't need to avoid feeling anxious, we just need to manage our emotions more effectively. Distraction doesn't work, but putting less focus on how we feel and getting on with life does, because anxiety isn't a monster that we're trying to hide from, it's just a natural part of our day-to-day process. The bottom line here is that when we stop treating anxiety like the bad guy and start responding to it in the right way, we naturally feel less anxious about it, and as a result, inevitably, put ourselves back in control. If you found this video helpful and you'd like a deeper level of support and advice, then check out the members area where I offer exclusive content, including my control system for retraining your mind, the full Clear Your Head Anxiety Relief Program, and weekly live Q&A sessions. Just hit the join button on my homepage or the link in the description and I'll see you there. Or if you'd like one-to-one guidance from me, then get in touch via the email address below to book a free, no obligation consultation. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who you think might benefit from it. But that's all for now. I'm Tim Box. Always remember, be kind to your mind. I'll see you next time.